I never told my son about my $40,000 monthly salary, even though he always saw me living a simple life. To him, I was just his mother. The woman who woke up early, packed his lunch, ironed his shirts, worked long hours, and somehow still smiled through exhaustion. He never questioned where the money came from, because there was never luxury, only quiet stability. But the truth? I'd been a senior executive for almost 2 decades at a multinational corporation, signing contracts worth millions, managing crises, leading teams across continents. And I hid it. Because I learned long ago that money makes people reveal who they truly are, and I didn't want to see that truth in my own son. So, I chose silence. I lived in the same modest apartment, wore the same old handbags, and cooked simple meals. I never bought a new car, even when I could have bought 10. I saved, invested, built, and grew my wealth in silence. Because real power doesn't shout. It observes. It was a Tuesday when Marcus called. His voice was hesitant, uneven, like a boy caught lying. "Mom, I need a favor. Simone's parents are visiting from overseas. It's their first time here, and, well, they want to meet you. We're having dinner at a restaurant Saturday night. Please come." Something in his tone felt off, not the warmth of a son excited to introduce his mother, but the tension of a man hoping not to be embarrassed. "Do they know about me?" I asked, softly. There was silence. Then he said, almost whispering, "I told them you work in an office. That you're simple." That word, simple, burned more than it should have. Simple, as if my whole life could be summarized in one harmless adjective. But I didn't argue. I only said, "All right, Marcus. I'll be there." When the call ended, I looked around my small living room, faded sofa, wooden shelves, a few framed photos. Everything looked ordinary. Exactly the way I had wanted it to look. But that day, I decided something. If my son wanted to show his in-laws a simple mother, then that's exactly what I'd give them. I wanted to see who they really were when they believed I had nothing. Saturday night arrived with a cold drizzle. I dressed deliberately, an old wrinkled gray dress, shapeless and faded. Worn-out shoes. No makeup, no jewelry. I tied my hair back into a loose ponytail and carried a frayed canvas tote bag. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. Perfect. The taxi dropped me in front of the restaurant, one of those high-end places where even the doorman looks like he earns more than most. Warm lights, velvet curtains, perfume in the air. I stepped in. And there they were. Marcus stood by a table near the window, wearing a crisp suit. His face froze when he saw me. "Mom, you came." "Of course, dear. You invited me." Beside him stood Simone, my daughter-in-law, in a cream dress with golden threads. Perfect posture, perfect hair, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. At the table sat her parents, Veronica and Franklin, the kind of couple that carried their wealth like armor. Veronica wore a dark green sequin dress, diamonds flashing at her throat and wrists. Her hair was pulled tight, her lipstick sharp. Franklin was quiet but imposing, a man who radiated authority from habit. I approached with small steps, the kind of walk that apologizes for existing. Marcus's discomfort was almost painful to watch. Simone gave me a polite kiss on the cheek that lasted half a second. "Mother-in-law, you look nice." She didn't mean it. "Dad, Mom, this is Marcus's mother," she said quickly. Veronica extended a manicured hand, her smile thin. "A pleasure, Mrs. Elara," I said softly. "Just Elara." Her handshake was cold and limp. Franklin's was barely there. They didn't offer me a seat, so I quietly pulled out my own chair and sat, at the farthest end of the table. The waiter brought out heavy leather-bound menus. I pretended not to understand the French words. "Do you need help with the menu?" Veronica asked, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Yes, please." I remember that night so clearly. The restaurant lights were warm, Soft music played in the background. But underneath all that elegance, there was tension. She sighed dramatically and told the waiter. Something simple for her. Nothing too much. The insult was wrapped in politeness. But it landed just the same. Marcus looked away. Simone pretended to check her phone. The conversation began lightly. Travel, weather, flight delays. But soon, like a scent that refuses to fade, the topic turned to money. Veronica led it. We're staying at the Grand Royal Hotel, she said. It's lovely, $1,000 a night, but worth it. You can really tell the difference in service. I smiled softly. How nice. Oh, and Franklin rented a car, one of those new electric Jaguars. You know, efficiency and class together. I nodded again. We've done a little shopping too, she added casually. Just a few things, maybe $8,000 total. Her eyes watched me, hungry for reaction. I gave her none. She leaned back, triumphant. And you, Elara? She asked. What kind of work do you do exactly? I work in an office, I said. I do a little of everything, paperwork, filing, whatever they need. Veronica exchanged a look with Franklin and smiled. Administrative work. That's nice. Honest work. All jobs are dignified. Yes, I said quietly. They are. The food arrived, tiny portions, expensive decorations. This steak costs $80, Veronica said, slicing it carefully. But it's worth every penny. Quality always is. I smiled. Of course. Then she asked, too smoothly. Do you live alone, Elara? Yes. It must be difficult, isn't it? Managing everything on your own. Especially with your salary. I manage, I said softly. I save where I can. She sighed. You're brave. Truly. I admire women who struggle. But of course, one always wishes to give our children more. I felt Marcus's shame across the table. His eyes were fixed on his plate. But Veronica wasn't done. We always made sure Simone had the best, education, travel, everything. We helped with the down payment for their house, too. $40,000. And the honeymoon, of course. 3 weeks in Europe, $15,000 well spent. She smiled sweetly. You must be proud of your son. Did you help them with anything? Not much, I said. Just something small. That's lovely, she said. It's the intention that matters. That was the moment something inside me shifted. A cold, sharp awareness. They thought I was poor. They thought I was disposable. They thought they could measure my worth, in dollars. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of every silent choice I'd made. To stay small, to hide my success. To let others underestimate me. Enough. Veronica raised her wine glass again. You know, Elara, Franklin and I were thinking. We'd like to help you a bit financially. Maybe a small allowance, $700 a month or so. That way Marcus doesn't have to worry about you. That's very generous, I said. We only ask one thing in return, she continued. That you give Marcus and Simone their space. Let them build their life without pressure or interference. There it was. The price of my silence. Marcus's face turned red. Mom, you don't have to listen to this. It's fine, I said calmly. I looked at Veronica. Tell me, Veronica. You said you gave them $40,000 for the house. $15,000 for the honeymoon. So, about $55,000 total? Yes, she said proudly. That's quite generous. When you love your children, she said. You don't hold back. I nodded slowly. You're right. When you love your children, you don't hold back. But tell me something, Veronica. Did that money buy you love, or just control? Her fork froze midair. The table went silent. Excuse me, she said. All evening, you've spoken about what you've spent. Not what you've given. There's a difference. Veronica's smile wavered. Franklin shifted uncomfortably. You've measured everyone's worth tonight, I said. Including mine. You looked at my dress and saw failure. But you know what I see when I look at you? A woman who can't stop reminding the world she's rich. Because deep down, she's terrified someone might forget. The air turned electric. Simone whispered, Mom, please. But I wasn't finished. You said you admire women who struggle. Tell me, Veronica. Have you ever struggled alone? Ever paid rent with the last cash in your pocket? Worked through fever because you couldn't afford to stop? I've worked hard for everything I have, she said defensively. No, I said quietly. You've managed what someone else built. There's a difference. I leaned back, calm now. Every word precise. 40 years ago, I had nothing. No family. No money. No support. Just a newborn child, and a determination to survive. I worked 12-hour days as a secretary. Studied at night. Took classes I couldn't afford. I learned business, finance, and leadership. While everyone said I couldn't. I didn't have anyone to bail me out. Or hand me a down payment. Everything I own, I earned. No one spoke. Even the waiters seemed to pause. And while you were busy collecting diamonds, I continued softly. I was building empires quietly. One file, one decision, one deal at a time. Marcus stared at me, stunned. Mom, you never told me. I smiled faintly. Because it never mattered. What mattered was that you became a good man. But tonight, I realized I made a mistake. I let silence make you think I was less. Maybe that's why people like Veronica think they can buy respect. Veronica's face turned pale. Who do you think you are? She snapped. The woman who signs the paychecks. Of the company your husband's firm just signed a merger with, I said evenly. And as of Monday, I'll be your board's newest strategic partner. Franklin's expression collapsed. You, what? I run Meridian Global, I said. Your investor's next project. I suppose we'll be seeing more of each other. Though next time. I suggest a restaurant where the food matches the company. I stood. Placed my napkin neatly on the table. And smiled at my son. Marcus, I'll wait for you outside. Then I turned and walked out. Past the waiters. Past the chandeliers. Past the whispers that followed me like music. Because that night, they finally learned what real wealth looks like. And real wealth is knowing your worth. And never letting anyone price it. I remember that night vividly. The air outside the restaurant felt colder than usual, maybe because I'd finally said everything I'd held in for years. My hands were trembling, but not from anger, from release. It's strange how truth can make you feel both lighter and lonelier at the same time. Marcus didn't speak the entire drive home. He looked like a boy again, the same boy who used to run to me after every scraped knee, now silent, unsure how to face the woman he thought he knew. When we reached home, he stopped me at the door. Mom, why didn't you tell me? About your company, your success, everything? I smiled faintly. Because a mother doesn't build her worth to be admired, Marcus. She builds it to protect. He looked down, ashamed. I let Simone and her mother talk to you like that. I placed a hand on his cheek. Respect isn't something others give you, son. It's something you hold on to when everyone tries to take it. That night, after he left, I sat on my couch, staring at my old wallet. Inside it was a single card, a platinum one. The same one I'd saved and worked for. But that wasn't the real treasure. The real treasure was the passbook I kept hidden under my bed, filled with small deposits made every month for 18 years. 18 years of skipped dinners, old coats, and quiet sacrifices. Every dollar saved not for luxury, but for security. For my son. For a future he wouldn't have to fear. 2 weeks later, I decided to visit the same mall Simone often bragged about, the one with glass floors and chandeliers brighter than the sun. Maybe I just wanted to see what her world looked like. Maybe. I wanted to test how invisible women like me really were. I walked into a luxury boutique. Perfume lingered in the air, expensive, heady, overwhelming. Salespeople glanced at me, measured me silently, and then looked away. That kind of judgment, it's sharp. You feel it before they even speak. A young cashier approached, polite but distant. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I nodded. "I'd like to buy some gifts. For my daughter-in-law." Her smile brightened a little. Money has a way of changing people's tones, doesn't it? I picked perfumes, silk scarves, a few dresses Simone would have adored. The total? Over $80,000. The cashier's eyes widened as I handed her the platinum card. Her fingers trembled as she slid it through the reader. The machine beeped once, then twice. Approved. Her face broke into a relieved grin, but then she froze. Her eyes darted to the screen. The smile drained from her lips. "Ma'am. I think there's a note on the account." "A note?" I asked, my voice calm but curious. She nodded, nervous now. "It says, if this card is ever used for over $50,000 in a single transaction, please request ID and verify owner identity with Meridian Global Holdings." For a second, the room spun a little. Meridian Global, my company. I leaned slightly forward. Her fingers shook as she dialed. She whispered into the phone, eyes flicking between me and the screen. Then her entire posture changed. Respect replaced suspicion. Her tone softened instantly. "I'm so sorry, Ms. Elara. Everything's fine now. It's such an honor." I smiled faintly. "No need to apologize. You were just doing your job." She nodded, cheeks flushed, eyes wide. But as I left the store, I realized something. People don't see who you are. They see what they think you can afford. And that day, I decided something else. If the world only listens to wealth, then I'll speak in numbers. Not to boast, but to remind every woman who's been underestimated. You are allowed to be powerful quietly. That night, I couldn't sleep. The perfume bag still sat on my table, unopened. $80,000, gone in a moment. But it wasn't the number that kept me awake. It was what that money represented. Every bill, every deposit, every quiet sacrifice behind that card had a story. And not one of them was pretty. When Marcus was 10, I used to wake up at 4 a.m. The city was still sleeping then, silent, except for the faint hum of buses starting their routes. I'd stand at the stove, boiling tea, watching the condensation drip down the window like tiny rivers. Then I'd put on my uniform, gray slacks, white shirt, and that stiff office blazer that smelled faintly of ink and old paper. I worked at a logistics company back then, typing invoices, handling shipments, managing other people's chaos for barely enough to cover rent. At night, when the building emptied, I'd stay. Not because I was paid to, but because I had to learn. I'd sneak into the boardroom, take photos of reports, read everything about contracts, suppliers, profit margins. Knowledge became my second job. And that job didn't have weekends. I remember one night when the power went out in our apartment. Marcus was studying by candlelight. He looked up at me and said, "Mom, will things ever get easier?" I wanted to lie. I wanted to say yes. But I told him the truth. "Not easier, Marcus. Just worth it." He didn't understand then. But that moment burned itself into me. Years passed, and I found a way out. A small company needed someone who understood logistics and numbers, really understood. They gave me a chance, and I took it like a drowning woman takes air. I worked, climbed, saved. 10 years later, I bought my first shares in that same company. By the time Marcus graduated college, I was sitting at the head of the table I used to clean. But here's what no one saw. What I never told Marcus, not even once. That $150,000 card wasn't a gift. It was my last line of defense. A safety net I built for him in case I was ever gone. I created that fund slowly, quietly, under a name only the bank and I knew. It wasn't for shopping. It wasn't for pride. It was for protection. The next day, I went to see Marcus. He was sitting on the porch, guilt written all over his face. Mom, about what Simone did, she didn't mean to. I held up my hand. Marcus, stop defending people who embarrass you in public. He exhaled slowly. I just don't want you to think I'm ashamed of you. I smiled faintly. I don't, son. I just think you forgot who raised you. He looked down. Maybe I did. I sat beside him and pulled out the platinum card. He glanced at it, confused. This card, I said, isn't your wife's ticket to luxury. It's your mother's insurance policy. Every cent on it was earned through blood, not inheritance. He frowned. Insurance policy? I nodded. When you were little, I promised myself you would never have to beg anyone for help. So I started saving. Every year, I added what I could. Sometimes it was $500. Sometimes $50. I didn't touch it. Not once. He was silent, his throat tight. You mean, that money? Yes, I said softly. 18 years of my life are sitting on that card. Then I told him the part one never wanted to say. The day your father left, I had $20 in my pocket. I could have broken then, but I didn't. I went to work the next day like nothing happened. Because I had you. Marcus's voice cracked. Why didn't you ever tell me how hard it was? I smiled. Because I didn't want you to carry my pain. I wanted you to build your own peace. He nodded slowly, eyes wet. And in that silence between us, something changed. For the first time, he didn't see me as the fragile mother who needed help. He saw me as the woman who built his world while pretending she had none. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed the cashier's pause, her fading smile, her realization. It wasn't embarrassment she felt. It was recognition. She'd seen the name, Elara Hayes, and knew it wasn't just another customer's card. It was mine. The same name that signed checks, sealed contracts, and built futures. And yet, I had let the world believe I was ordinary. Maybe that was my greatest victory. Because when you stop needing to prove your worth, you finally start to live it. The morning after that conversation with Marcus, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Emails. Missed calls. News alerts. At first, I thought it was a system glitch, maybe something from work. But then I saw the headline. Meridian Global's CEO revealed, the woman behind the quiet fortune. My name was there. My face. My story. They'd found out. Every private hour of sacrifice, every silent step forward I'd taken, was now public record. It started when the merger papers were filed. My signature, once hidden behind initials, had finally appeared in full, Elara Hayes. Some intern at a financial magazine must have connected the dots between the quiet partner, the mystery investor, and the woman who'd walked out of that restaurant last night. By morning, the internet was already building its own version of me. The single mother who built an empire. The unknown mogul. The silent titan, one headline called me. It should have felt like victory. It didn't. Because I didn't build my life for applause. I built it for survival. When I arrived at the office, my staff stood straighter. Some smiled too brightly. Others avoided my eyes, unsure if the stories were true. I walked through the lobby, polished marble floors reflecting a woman everyone suddenly wanted to understand. The receptionist whispered, "Ms. Hayes, the media's waiting outside." I paused, adjusted my coat, and said quietly, "Then let them wait." Because I'd waited my whole life. At noon, Marcus showed up. He looked different. Softer. Humbled. "Mom," he said quietly, "everyone's talking about you." "I know," I said. "And are they saying anything new?" He smiled faintly. "They're saying you built everything from nothing. That you're the reason half this city still has jobs." I sighed. "They're late to the story, Marcus. You always were." He laughed nervously. "Simone's been crying all morning." "Regret or fear?" I asked. "Both, I think." That evening, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Simone stood there, makeup smeared, designer bag hanging limp from her arm. "Elara, I didn't know." Her voice trembled. "I thought you were just ordinary." I finished for her. She nodded. "Yes. I judged you. I judged you so badly." I looked at her, really looked at her, the fear, the guilt, the realization that money didn't make her powerful. "You judged what you could see," I said softly. "But the strongest things in life are invisible: patience, dignity, discipline." She looked down. "I don't deserve forgiveness." I smiled faintly. "Forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about understanding." That night, Marcus, Simone, and I sat at the kitchen table, the same one I'd eaten noodles at when I couldn't afford anything better. No chandeliers. No waiters. No $80 steaks. Just us. "Mom," Marcus said, "why didn't you ever tell anyone who you really were?" "Because people see what they want to see," I said. "If they think you're small, let them. If they think you're weak, let them. The truth doesn't need defending. It needs time." Simone whispered, "And what now?" "Now?" I said with a small smile. "Now, I stop hiding. But not for me, for every woman who's been underestimated in a quiet room." By the end of that week, every news outlet wanted an interview. They wanted to hear how I built it, how I survived, how I succeeded. But I said no. Instead, I released one statement, just one. The greatest investment I ever made wasn't in business. It was in silence. Because while the world was busy talking, I was busy building. Weeks later, Veronica sent me a message. "Elara, I owe you an apology. I was wrong about you. About everything." I didn't reply. Some lessons are meant to echo unanswered. Because respect, the kind that lasts, isn't demanded. It's earned. Brick by brick. Choice by choice. And sometimes, the richest thing you can own is the look on their faces when they realize you never needed their approval to shine. 3 weeks had passed since that night at the restaurant. The story had settled into the world like a storm cloud that refused to fade, whispered about in boardrooms, printed on glossy magazine covers, and discussed in voices that suddenly carried respect when they said my name. I had learned to live with it, the attention, the praise, the curiosity. But nothing could have prepared me for the knock on my office door that morning. My assistant's voice came softly through the intercom. "Miss Hayes, there's a woman here to see you. She says her name is Veronica." For a moment, I said nothing. The sound of her name brought a stillness I hadn't felt in weeks, like the calm before thunder. "Send her in," I said finally. She walked in wearing a tailored beige coat, her hair pinned neatly, her heels clicking against the marble floor. But there was something different about her now. No diamonds. No smug smile. Just hesitation. She stood in front of my desk, hands trembling slightly, eyes uncertain. "Elara," she said softly. "You look, well." I smiled. "Better than the last time you saw me, I imagine." She nodded slowly. Yes. Better. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was thick, heavy with things she wanted to say and things I had no reason to forgive. Finally, she broke it. I owe you an apology. Her voice cracked. That night, at dinner. I was cruel. I thought I was protecting my son. I don't know what I thought anymore. I leaned back, studying her. Veronica, the woman who once spoke like royalty, now looked small, fragile even. You thought money made you powerful, I said quietly. She nodded. I did. It's all I ever knew. My parents were poor, and when I married Franklin, I promised myself I'd never feel small again. So I kept spending, buying, showing off, thinking I could buy respect. Her eyes filled with tears. And then I met you. And I realized, I'd been chasing something you already had. I tilted my head. And what's that? Peace, she whispered. You have peace. And no amount of money can buy that. For the first time, I felt something soften in me, not pity, but recognition. We were different, yes. But both of us had lived our lives trying to prove something to the world. I stood and walked to the window. The city below glittered, alive, restless, hungry. You know, Veronica, I said, I used to think success would heal me. That if I built enough, earned enough, I'd never have to feel small again. I turned back to her. But all it did was teach me that real strength isn't in what you own. It's in what you can walk away from. Veronica's tears finally fell. I'm sorry, Elara. Truly. Apologies don't change the past, I said gently. But they do change what comes next. She looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. Can we start over? I considered her for a long moment. Then, slowly, I nodded. We can start with honesty. She laughed softly, a broken, humbled laugh. Franklin wanted to come too, she said. But he's too embarrassed. He keeps saying he didn't know who you were. I smiled faintly. None of you did. That was the point. And Marcus, she asked quietly. He's been visiting us more often. He's different now. Quieter. Kinder. Good, I said. That means he's learning what matters. Before she left, Veronica hesitated by the door. Elara, there's one more thing. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. It's a check. I wanted to return the money you spent on them, the card you gave Simone that day. I know now it was yours, not Marcus's. I looked at the envelope but didn't take it. Keep it, I said. I can't. Yes, you can. Because what I gave wasn't money. It was a lesson. One I think you've finally learned. Her chin trembled. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me, I said softly. Thank the version of yourself who had the courage to walk in here. After she left, I sat in silence for a long time. The city outside kept moving, cars, people, dreams, none of it slowing for anyone's pain or pride. And I realized something. Forgiveness doesn't always come with words. Sometimes, it's just a quiet understanding that we are all doing our best with what we know, until we learn better. That night, when Marcus called, his voice was light, almost boyish. Mom, he said, Simone and I are thinking of starting over somewhere quieter. Maybe the countryside. I think we both have some growing to do. I smiled. That sounds like a good idea, son. And you? He asked. What will you do now? I looked around my quiet office, the skyline glowing through the glass, the weight of old battles finally fading. I think, I said, I'll start living. Not surviving. Just living. And as I hung up, I felt something I hadn't in years. Lightness. The kind that comes not from victory, but from release. The kind that whispers, you've done enough. We were young. I loved her once, but when I chose business over her, she left, pregnant. I didn't know until years later that she'd had a child. A son. My breath caught. A son. I read faster, my pulse racing. His name is Marcus. When I found out, it was too late. Evelyn had passed, and Marcus was already a man. I tried to reach him, to tell him who I was, but I couldn't bring myself to destroy the image he had of his real father. So I did what I could. I helped from afar. I funded his studies. I ensured he met you one day. I knew if anyone could love him for who he was, not for what he could become, it would be you. And you did. You loved him before you knew. I stopped reading. The room felt smaller, the air thinner. Marcus. My Marcus. Not by law. But by blood. The same Marcus who had betrayed me, and whom I had forgiven. I turned back to the letter, tears blurring the words. The key inside this envelope belongs to a safety box at Evercrest Bank. Inside, you'll find the last piece of my promise, not wealth, but truth. I couldn't give you a perfect life, Elara. But I could give you the peace of knowing that every hardship, every betrayal, every tear you shed, was part of something far greater. Because love doesn't end with understanding. It begins with it. Always yours. Nathan. The words sank into me like rain on dry earth. All this time, I thought my story with Marcus was a coincidence, a cruel twist of fate. But it wasn't. It was a thread, woven long before I ever saw its pattern. Nathan had known. He had chosen silence, to let life reveal truth in its own time. That afternoon, I went to Evercrest Bank. The clerk brought out a small steel box and placed it before me. Inside were two things. A locket, inside it, a photograph of a woman holding a baby, Evelyn and Marcus. And a letter addressed not to me, but to him. Give this to Marcus when you're ready, it said on the envelope. I held it for a long time, tracing Nathan's handwriting with my thumb. Ready. Was I? Maybe not. But I knew I would be. Because now I understood, life doesn't always hand you closure neatly wrapped. Sometimes, it gives you fragments, waiting for you to put them together when your heart is strong enough to see the whole picture. That night, as I watched the city lights flicker outside my window, I whispered to the empty room. You kept your promise, Nathan. You gave me truth. And for the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't afraid of it. I didn't sleep that night. The city outside my window buzzed softly, but inside my apartment, time stood still. The letter lay on my coffee table, untouched since I brought it home. Nathan's handwriting stared at me like a heartbeat frozen in ink. Give this to Marcus when you're ready. Ready. What did ready even mean? I had spent months trying to rebuild my life after the storm Marcus caused, and now I was supposed to open that wound again. But the truth had a pulse of its own. It whispered, you owe it to both of them, and to yourself. The next morning, I called Marcus. The phone rang longer than usual before his deep, hesitant voice answered. Elara? I wasn't expecting your call. There's something I need to give you, I said quietly. It's from your father. A long silence followed. My father's dead. No, I whispered. Your real one. We met that evening in a quiet park near the river, the same one where Nathan used to take me when we first fell in love. The air smelled like wet grass and pine. Marcus was already there, standing under the same oak tree where Nathan had once carved our initials into the bark. He looked older. Tired. But there was something else in his eyes, guilt, maybe. Or curiosity. I walked toward him, holding the envelope like it was glass. Before I give you this, I said, you need to promise me one thing. What's that? Whatever's inside, you'll read it to the end. Don't stop halfway. Promise. He nodded slowly. I handed him the envelope. He turned it over, staring at the familiar handwriting, the same cursive his mother must have once seen. "Nathan Hayes," he murmured. "How do you have this?" "He left it for you." He was your father, Marcus." For a moment, the world went quiet. No birds. No wind. Just silence pressing against my chest. Marcus blinked, confusion clouding his features. "You're lying." "I wish I was." He tore open the letter with trembling hands. His eyes moved across the page, slow at first, then faster, until they widened in disbelief. And then, his hands began to shake. He sank onto the bench, the letter clutched against his chest. "All these years," he whispered. "I thought he hated me. I thought that's why he always looked at me like I reminded him of something he couldn't forgive." "He didn't hate you," I said softly, sitting beside him. "He loved you. He just didn't know how to tell you without breaking everything." Marcus laughed, the kind of broken laugh that hides behind tears. "He helped me get my first job. He paid my college debt. I thought it was pity. It was love, Marcus. The only way he knew how to show it." The sun was setting, turning the river gold. Marcus looked at me, eyes glistening. "You knew?" "Not until last week." "And you still called me?" "Because truth matters more than pride. And you deserve to know who you really were." He looked down at the letter again, then back at me. "You loved him. More than life itself. Then why tell me this? Wouldn't it hurt to bring him back like this?" "Because pain doesn't scare me anymore," I said quietly. "But regret does." We sat there for a long time. No words, just the sound of the river and the letter fluttering softly in the wind. When he finally spoke again, his voice was small, like the child he once was, asking for answers that never came. "Do you think he forgave me? He never blamed you. And you?" I smiled faintly. "I forgave you long before I knew why." The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of rain again, the same scent from that morning Nathan had left for the hospital. Marcus stood and looked out at the water. "He said in the letter that there's a locket, with my mother's photo." "Yes," I said, reaching into my coat pocket. "It's yours." When I placed it in his palm, he didn't move for a moment. Then he opened it slowly, his eyes filling again. "That's her," he whispered. "I've never seen this picture before." The emotion in his voice was raw, the kind that doesn't need translation. As the sky turned dark, Marcus turned to me one last time. "You know, Elara," he said, "for years I thought I'd ruined your life." "Maybe you did," I said with a sad smile. "But maybe you also gave it meaning." He smiled back faintly, folded the letter, and tucked it into his jacket. "Thank you, for giving me my father." And then he walked away, slowly, into the misty evening, holding a piece of truth that had taken a lifetime to reach him. That night, when I returned home, I felt something inside me shift. Not peace. Not sadness. Something deeper, release. Nathan had hidden a secret that could have destroyed us, but instead, it bound two broken souls with understanding. And in that understanding, I finally found freedom.
The next morning came with the kind of quiet that feels like a decision waiting to be made. The letter had changed everything. But it also left something unfinished, an ache that kept whispering, "Go back. See where it all began." That's how I found myself sitting in Marcus's car, the old road stretching before us, leading toward the countryside home Nathan once loved, the place where our story had both begun and broken. Neither of us spoke much on the way. The engine hummed softly, the trees blurred past, and the past seemed to lean closer with every mile. After 2 hours, we turned onto a narrow dirt path surrounded by wildflowers and old fences. And there it was, the house. Faded white walls. A sagging porch. A roof that had seen too many winters. Yet somehow, it still stood with quiet dignity, like it had been waiting for someone to return. Marcus parked and got out first. He looked around, his eyes scanning the land, the rusted mailbox, the tire swing that barely moved in the wind. He used to bring me here sometimes, Marcus said. Said this was his thinking place. I never understood what he meant. I smiled faintly. This house held more of him than the city ever did. We stepped onto the creaking porch, the wood sighing under our weight. The door opened easily, like the house recognized us. Dust motes floated through the sunlight, and the air smelled of old books, pine, and memory. Inside, everything was frozen in time. A mug still sat on the table. A newspaper from years ago lay folded neatly by the armchair. And above the fireplace, a photograph. Nathan, younger. Holding a baby. Marcus. I felt my throat tighten. He kept this here all these years, I whispered. Marcus stared at it, his jaw trembling. He looks proud. He was. We wandered through the rooms in silence. Each corner told a story, one I'd tried to forget. In the study, we found Nathan's desk, covered in old papers and notebooks. Marcus brushed the dust away and opened a drawer. Inside was a small wooden box. What's this? He asked. I stepped closer, my heart beating faster. Nathan's handwriting again. On a note taped to the lid. For whoever needs to understand. Marcus opened it carefully. Inside were stacks of letters, dozens, all written to Marcus. Unsent. Unread. He picked one and began reading aloud, voice shaking. My son, it began. I don't know how to be your father without breaking the life you already have. So I stay away, hoping one day you'll understand that distance doesn't mean absence. It means protection. Marcus's voice broke. He couldn't continue. I reached for another letter, the one on top. Elara deserves peace. She was the reason I learned love could be real, not just promised. If someday she reads this, tell her I'm sorry for every truth I buried, and for every silence that hurt her. The room felt smaller then, heavy with everything left unsaid. Marcus looked at me, tears in his eyes. He wrote to me, every year? Yes, I said softly. He never stopped. He sat down on the floor, surrounded by the letters, and let the tears fall. And I did the same, for the man who had loved in secret, for the boy who had finally found his father, and for the woman who had carried both of their silences for too long. After a while, Marcus found something else inside the box, an envelope marked for Elara. He handed it to me. My hands trembled as I opened it. Elara, it began. If you're reading this, it means I never found the courage to tell you everything. The $150,000 wasn't for you to spend, it was for Marcus. For the house, for the life I couldn't give him when it mattered. But if you found it first, use it as you see fit, you always knew what was right. You always did. I smiled through my tears. He saved that money, all those years. For me? Marcus asked. For both of us, I said quietly. For forgiveness.
We stayed until sunset. The light poured through the windows, painting everything gold, as if the house itself was finally exhaling. Before we left, Marcus placed one of the letters back on the desk. I'll come back, he whispered. Not as a stranger this time. And as we stepped outside, a soft wind stirred, warm, like a final goodbye. Driving back, Marcus broke the silence. You know, Elara, he said, I used to think strength meant never looking back. But I was wrong. Maybe strength is facing what hurts, and still walking forward. I looked at him, pride swelling quietly in my chest. You've grown up, Marcus. Maybe I just finally saw the kind of woman my father fell in love with. That night, when I reached home, I placed Nathan's last letter on my nightstand. For years, his silence had felt like a wound. Now, it felt like closure. I turned off the light and whispered into the dark. Rest now, Nathan. We're both finally free. It was 3 weeks later when the envelope arrived. Plain. Unmarked. But the handwriting, that careful, steady curve of letters. I knew it instantly. Nathan. The lawyer's office was small and quiet, filled with the faint smell of paper and time. Marcus sat beside me, hands clasped tightly, his thumb tracing invisible circles on his knee. Across the desk, the lawyer, a thin, silver-haired man named Mr. Redding, cleared his throat gently. "This was filed 8 years ago," he said. Mr. Hayes updated it one final time, 6 months before he passed. He left a few letters, and a message recorded in his own voice. My breath caught. Even after all this time, the sound of his name still carried weight. Mr. Redding pressed play. Nathan's voice filled the room, older, rougher, but still unmistakably his. "If you're hearing this, it means I ran out of time to say what mattered most. Elara. Marcus. I've carried 2 kinds of silence all my life, one born of fear, and one born of love." I closed my eyes. The sound of him was both a comfort and a wound. "Elara, you once told me that love without honesty isn't love at all. You were right. I kept my distance because I was afraid my failures would define me in your eyes. But now I see, you never needed me perfect. You just needed me present." My heart ached. Even now, he knew exactly what to say. "And Marcus," Nathan's tone softened. "I wasn't there when you learned to walk, or when you fell the first time. I wasn't there for your graduation, your wedding, or the 1,000 small moments that make a father's life worth living. But I watched. I followed your life quietly, proudly. Every success you had, I celebrated in silence. I'm sorry I didn't celebrate it beside you." Marcus wiped his face with the back of his hand, staring at the floor. "The money," Nathan continued, "was never the real gift. It was a symbol, of time I couldn't give, of security I wanted you both to have. But there's something else, something I've left behind that means far more." A pause. Then, softly. "Elara, do you remember the night we dreamed of building something that mattered? Not a business, not a house, something that helped people like us, people who started with nothing." My eyes opened slowly. That night. I remembered it vividly. A small apartment. A flickering lamp. A young couple who believed kindness could change the world. "I built it," Nathan said. "It's called the Haven Project. It funds scholarships for single parents, offers housing grants, and helps those rebuilding their lives from scratch. It's already helped hundreds, and now, I want it to belong to you both. You built the dream. I just kept it alive." The recording clicked off. Silence filled the room again, but this time it was full, not empty. Mr. Redding handed me a folder. Inside were documents, ownership papers, account details, a foundation charter. At the bottom, Nathan's signature. And under it, my name. "He wanted you to co-direct it," Mr. Redding said gently. "He said it was always yours, he was just holding it until you were ready." That evening, Marcus and I stood outside the foundation's building. It was beautiful, modern glass and warm light spilling through the windows. A bronze plaque by the entrance read, "The Haven Project, founded by Nathan Hayes, inspired by Elara and Marcus." For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, Marcus said, "He didn't just save money, Mom. He saved people." "He saved us too," I whispered. Inside, we met a young woman, barely 20, with tired eyes and a hopeful smile. She'd been awarded housing through the program. She thanked us, not knowing the history that had brought her here. And for the first time, I felt something lift, not grief, not regret, but peace. Later that night, standing by the window of my home, I watched the city lights shimmer like tiny fires. Nathan's voice still echoed in my head. "You never needed me perfect. You just needed me present." I smiled softly. "You're present now," I whispered. "In every heart this place touches." Marcus walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. "For you," he said, handing me one. "You taught me what strength looks like." I looked at him, the son I had raised alone, the man who had found forgiveness, the child who had learned to love without pride. No, I said gently. We taught each other. That night, before I slept, I placed Nathan's final letter inside the same box that once held his hidden notes. I closed the lid and traced my fingers over it. A lifetime of silence had finally found its voice. Nathan's last words, written in his own hand, were etched into the final page. When you love someone, don't wait for the perfect moment to show it. Time doesn't give refunds. But love leaves echoes that never fade. And as I turned off the light, I realized something profound. Some stories don't end with goodbye. They end with understanding. And that is enough.